Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's been a minute. This is the Grayzone Live. Here with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate. What's up, Aaron?
What's up, Max? How's it going, everybody? Thanks for being here with us. If you're watching us live, we appreciate you joining us. And remember, like this stream if you can. Help us beat algorithmic suppression. And also, be sure to check out thegrayzone.com because, Max, you just published a new article I think is really, really important that goes into this group called Zaka, which is billed as an Israeli rescue group. And they've been used as one of the key sources for so many of the claims that Israel's made about what happened on October 7th. And as you expose in extensive detail, this group is a fraud. Not only have their claims about October 7th been exposed as lies, but they themselves are scandal plagued. And I really hope people go and read that article after you're done watching this. And we're going to talk more about its contents, but it's a really important piece of journalism.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, someone was commenting that I was late because I was at the hairdresser. Obviously, you can see that's not the case. I've just been like completely down the rabbit hole on this. That piece is part one of a two-part investigation I'm working on. And I guess you could say even a three-part because my initial October 7th piece on friendly fire deaths has really been vindicated in recent days as we hear the testimony from those who have been released from captivity in Gaza at the War Cabinet meeting yesterday, as we hear from more eyewitnesses. And now we're confronted with one of the most expensive propaganda campaigns, one of the biggest tsunamis of propaganda, war propaganda, regime change propaganda that we've ever confronted. And we've been confronting this for years. Excuse me for a second while I have adjust the lighting here. Give me 5 seconds.
Yeah, and what Max is referring to are all of a sudden, nearly 2 months after October 7th, these allegations of mass rape by Hamas militants are resurfacing. And it's pretty clear what's going on here. Israel is suffering a PR crisis because of what it's doing in Gaza, this mass murder campaign. And so we're seeing all the usual suspects, Hillary Clinton and others, coming out to basically try to give credibility to these allegations that Hamas committed mass rape on October 7th. And it's important to call that out because, as we're going to talk about, the evidence for that just is not there. And this follows so many other documented frauds committed by Israel and its supporters. And some of the same people involved in those frauds,
Same sources.
Some of the same sources, including this group Zaka, which you profile at the Grayzone in your new piece, are involved in pushing this as well. So it's important to call it out because this is now the playbook for trying to justify the ongoing atrocities by Israel inside Gaza, the ongoing mass murder campaign by Israel inside Gaza.
Yeah, it's sort of the background noise for genocide. And predictably, they've weaponized liberalism. They've weaponized feminism to justify the mass killing of women and children. Predictably and also disgustingly. So here's my take on why this is happening more broadly. October 7th was an unprecedented shock to an Israeli public that thought that they were a villa in the jungle, as former Israeli Prime Minister General Ehud Barak put it. They thought that Netanyahu thought that the Gaza situation was in the icebox. They thought they were invulnerable. They trusted their intelligence services. And the trauma of October 7th, where basically their entire Gaza division was wiped out, was impossible to overcome. The borders of Israel have been at least temporarily changed, and this could be a permanent fact of life. The southern communities of Israel are a closed military zone, which means that no one can live there anymore. The northern areas of Israel, all the way up to Sfat, which is like a large town or city, and the Golan, but mainly the areas close to territory where Hezbollah is active in Lebanon, completely depopulated. There were initially people living in tent cities like refugees who were Jewish Israelis after these attacks. And in order for them to restore the borders that they stole through war and ethnic cleansing, they believe that they need to commit genocide in Gaza to thin the population, as Special Advisor to Netanyahu Ron Dermer put it, to push the population out into the Sinai Desert and to completely eliminate a political entity which has a massive popular constituency in Hamas, to completely eliminate it. And that's what we're seeing them attempt to do. A new poll shows that only 1.8% of the Israeli public believes that the Israeli military is using too much firepower in Gaza. Most want to see more firepower. That's where the Israeli public's at. So they believe that this war is strategically necessary in order to restore their deterrence, the way that it's being fought. And they need the United States to stay on board. And you have an administration that's coming up for re-election that's very weak. They need to keep them on board. So they're going to target a liberal constituency with their propaganda. They've got the Republicans. And they need to convince the Israeli public that what they're doing in Gaza is morally justified. It's a tough choice, but they've got to bomb lots of families in their homes. They have to do it. Why? Because they raped our women. They raped our women. And so they established this commission, which has a long name like gender and crimes of gender and against children and so on. And basically, it took them a while to get this together, the Israeli government. They found a woman who's sort of telegenic. Her name is Kohav El-Kayam Levy, who is a U.S.-trained lawyer who consulted for the Israeli military and attorney general. She's basically the salesperson. And the whole point of this commission is not to find out what happened on October 7th and see if there's evidence. It's to come to the conclusion, a predetermined conclusion, that there was mass rape. And this commission's job is to find any visual aid or piece of evidence or testimony that can back up their predetermined conclusion, and then to filter it out to the media. And so we're seeing all these stories come out. High profile event at the UN, Aaron, as you mentioned, with a notorious truth teller and peacenik, Hillary Clinton, Sheryl Sandberg, who really cares about the people. And it's just about a giant marketing campaign to create this propaganda shock and awe, to distract from the genocide in Gaza and to justify it back to the Israeli public. And so who was on the scene after October 7th? It was the Israeli military. As we've seen, many military commanders have lied. They've lied about, like, one commander was caught lying, or had to retract lying about seeing babies hung on a laundry line. And he actually said the IDF spokesman told him to say that. We exposed at the Grayzone another military reservist for initially saying he saw beheaded babies. But there were also these so-called first responders in the south of Israel who were on the scene, who are responsible for the most obscene atrocity fabrications. And this is where Zaka comes in, this group that Aaron mentioned. And it's really there's one man who is responsible for most of the obscene fabrications, either confirming the fake beheaded baby story or spinning out a story of children being mutilated while their parents were killed, and then the Hamas militants having a pleasant lunch while they lay dead in the next room, which was repeated by Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, during an October 31st Senate hearing, a completely bogus story, which I expose in this report. Biden, of course, claimed he saw photos of the beheaded babies. There were none. But these are emanating from Zaka and one man, Yossi Landau, who is their so-called Southern commander, and who now says that anybody who questions him, he said this in an interview, should be killed. And I go into the history of the organization. We can talk about it, but I this is just my take on the whole backdrop to what we're seeing now and what we're going to be confronted with for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and that sort of indignation at the request for evidence, which is at the heart of any allegation. If you're going to make an allegation, you have to provide evidence. You have also the head of that commission, this so-called rape commission by Israel, who you mentioned before. Her name is
Kohav El-Kayam Levy.
There's a profile of her in Haaretz where she takes offense at people calling her, like journalists and others from around the world, calling her and asking her for evidence. So this is what she says. She says this: am I the one who needs to provide the evidence for the terrorist deeds? What kind of travesty is it that they are imposing the burden of proof on me? So the head of the supposed commission by Israel to investigate rape, alleged rape on October 7th, is saying it's a travesty that she has to provide proof for her claims. So they just taken at face value that, yes, these barbaric savages, as Barry Weiss called them, they committed mass rape, and anybody demanding evidence for this allegation is taking part in a travesty.
Yeah. And so here's that head of that commission. I caught her spreading a obvious lie out of many dubious claims during Harvard, a session where it was pretty much her introductory session, hosted by the Maimonides Society, which is a Jewish pro-Israel group at Harvard Medical School. Here she is. Kohav Elkayam Levy.
Another image shows the body of a young woman stripped from the waist down, her underwear torn, hung on one leg, and she was photographed on the site at the Nova Music Festival.
Okay, that is false. I can't show you the photos that she's referring to because we'll be demonetized and we could get a strike. I don't know what'll happen. We'll definitely be demonetized. But they're on my Twitter timeline right now. They're or everywhere I've investigated it. These photos were initially shared by a website called Hamas.massacre, which is being promoted by Israel's foreign ministry. They show exactly what she described: a woman or women face down, stripped from the waist down, with their underwear kind of ripped to the side. And I looked for the source of those photos, and I found them being shared as early as March 2022 with people claiming on Twitter that they were Ukrainian female soldiers. So the photos originated from well before October 7th, 2023. And what they appear to show is actually female Kurdish fighters. The Kurdish army in quote unquote Rojava uses many female fighters, and their bodies were defiled, possibly by formerly CIA-backed Syrian quote unquote rebels. But the point is, she just found some photo that looked like she could market it as a rape victim because there were no other photos from the Nova Electronic Music Festival showing anything like that. They're clearly wearing military uniforms. And then she just delivers a somewhat vague description of it. So I called her out. My tweet went viral. It got like 20,000 likes. And she felt compelled to respond. So I want to show you her response. She responded directly to me, and it's so revealing of what this whole commission is about. So here's her response to me. She blocked me, so it's a screenshot, which was also very mature to deliver sort of a petulant response and then block me. Thanks so much for sharing this, she writes to me, giving such an important exposure of the event at Harvard, one of the hardest moments in my life. Also, thanks for sharing my article, and we'll talk about that, where I advocated for the protection of prisoners' rights, blah, blah, blah. So basically, she just thanks me for sharing a video of her where she's caught in a major lie, a major deception. She doesn't acknowledge it and say, I was confused, but the rest of what I stated was correct. Or she didn't say, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. She just thanks me for the promotion, because that's all this commission is about. It's only about creating publicity, spreading propaganda, and giving pro-Israel lobbyists and activists the ammo they need to try to shut down their opponents. Oh, well, what do you think about Hamas rape? What do you think? And they can just table the entire discussion. So she doesn't even care about the truth or facts or inquiry. That's not what this is about. And you can see, she's saying, she advocated for prisoners' rights. I highlighted a 2015 article she wrote for the Israeli Attorney General, which was first mentioned by Mondoweiss. And she's explaining how to use human rights law to break Palestinian prisoner hunger strikes. And so she does it in a liberal way by saying the prisoner's right to life is the most important right, and that's why we have to force feed them. So,
and Max, listen, very important point about, so you called out this commission head and this Israeli Foreign Ministry backed website, Hamas Massacre, for sharing a photo that was not from inside Israel. It was long predates Israel, and you traced it back to the Kurdish areas. So
I found it on other websites going back to 2022.
Tellingly, accordingly, now that photo has been removed from this website that she is citing. And so we're not going to show the photo, but I just want to show you the caption on the photo because it's been archived. And this is what it showed. This is what the caption said. It said, Nova Party victim raped and then killed. And above that, I'm not showing it, is the original photo. So that photo now, which originally was on HamasMassacre.net, whatever it's called, which is promoted by Israel, that photo has been removed. So that there is an acknowledgement that they know they're sharing a fake photo, and that's why they took it down. But this commission head tacitly is also acknowledging that you were right in pointing out that this photo is not from Israel because she's not trying to correct you when you pointed it out to her.
Exactly. And this is like the heart of the entire investigation is that photo, because it has been referred to in Physicians for Human Rights' report, which is entirely based on the Israeli Commission's propaganda dissemination, and the BBC report that just came out yesterday. They both reference that photo. They don't show the photo, but they reference it. And they also reference a photo of a woman who's being taken captive into Gaza, and they say she has blood on her pelvic region. But if you actually look at the photo, she's wearing white sweatpants, and it looks like she fell on the ground in mud, and there's mud on the back of her sweatpants. But there's absolutely no evidence there.
And even if it's blood, even if it is blood, you can't look at that and say this is definitely evidence of sexual assault. It could be, but you can't look at that and say that this proves it. You just can't.
I mean, she's clothed, she's getting into a truck, and that's all that happens. And the Hamas militant also has blood, so it could have been that somebody else was killed near them. But then we just have these lurid testimonies of gang rape that have emerged from one peculiar character named Yoni Sadon. This is something that Barry Weiss promoted, who's been a real
call the militant savages. As she did. Yes.
So who is Yoni Sadon? Yoni Sadon. Okay, I'm responding to Barry Weiss here. She's quoting from the big investigation that led. This was obviously fueled by Kohav El-Kayam Levy's commission, the Hamas Rape Commission. And Barry Weiss is quoting this character, Yoni Sadon, who said, "I saw this beautiful woman with 8 or 10 of the fighters beating and raping her. And they were laughing, and then the last one shot her in the head." So this is at the Nova Electronic Music Festival. 10 Hamas savages pounce on one woman and they gang rape her. And they just have the time and the physical ability to do that when, as we know, there was intense crossfire, complete chaos everywhere. And at a certain point, Apache helicopters, Israeli helicopters operating in the sky.
Barry Weiss is actually not quoting it accurately because the original quote is even more ridiculous. The quote from this purported witness is actually that I saw this beautiful woman with the face of an angel being raped, which is this creepy fetishistic language. It's so obvious what they're trying to do here is conjure this image of this like angelic Israeli victim being raped by these Hamas savages. Who talks like that? If you saw someone being raped, would you describe them as a beautiful woman with the face of an angel? Is that how you would describe a rape victim? I mean,
a lot of this is just projections of lurid fantasies.
And this is a hard issue to discuss because you never want to downplay an allegation as serious as this. But I'm sorry, it's so transparently fake, and we shouldn't be intimidated into not calling it out for the fraud that it is.
I'm not gonna. I mean, right away, I knew they were going to do this. I knew that this was their next move. I'm not surprised at all. And I'm not afraid at all to call it out, because the whole point of this is to justify real killing of, I mean, and I'm not saying atrocities didn't take place on October 7th either.
Of course.
But this is to justify an atrocity like I've never seen in my life. So
Yes.
back to Yoni Sadon. Who is this guy? Do we have any evidence that he was even at the Nova Electronic Music Festival? Because it took him from October 7th to December 3rd to even reach the media with this insane allegation of witnessing 10 Hamas militants gang rape a woman. And he was found at a military base called the Camp Shura, which is has been constructed near the Israeli city of Ramle. And it's where all the bodies are being taken and examined, including bodies of Hamas fighters, which have been presented as dead Israelis. And he was apparently found there and furnished to the Times, to the Sunday Times, the British Sunday Times. I can't find any record of him existing on social media. There's no photos of him at festival. There are three other profiles of Yoni Sadon's on Facebook and Twitter, and one of them has gone on Twitter to deny being him, because so many people he describes as female investigators from all factions are reaching out to him on his Instagram account to try to get him to testify. So they can't even find, the female investigators can't even find the real Yoni Sadon. So this is just weird. And yeah.
Well, and then you have the fact also, and this is so important. Like, if you're going to make an allegation like this, there needs to be some evidence. First of all, there's no, as far as I understand, they have not identified a single person who claims that they were raped. So therefore, everyone who was allegedly raped on October 7th, they would have had to have been killed. They can't find a single person. Of 1,000 interviews conducted by the police initially, until this Yoni witness came along, there was only one who claimed that they witnessed a rape, and again, it was another really fantastical tale about a gang rape. And then you have this, which is just so important, and this should be acknowledged in every single story about these mass rape allegations. The Times of Israel reported over a month ago that, quote, physical evidence of sexual assault was not collected from corpses by Israel's overtaxed morgue facilities. So they're going to, first of all, so they're acknowledging that there's no surviving alleged victim of rape. So then everyone would have had to have been killed. But now they're saying of all those who were killed, there was no physical evidence collected, which is just very, how can you, if you're going to claim there's rape, you need to have physical evidence. But again, going on, morgue officials have not designated individual cases as rape because of a lack of court-compliant physical proof. So you have no alleged survivors, and you have no physical evidence. So then all you have are these alleged witnesses, one of whom has just emerged, this Yoni character who we're now talking about.
Yeah.
2 months after the fact.
Yeah. So here's what happened to those who were directly sexually attacked, according to Israel's Minister of Women's Empowerment, who we'll get into her in a second. Israel's Women's Empowerment Minister. They have so many fake government titles in Israel. They have like 68 ministers, Minister of Strategic Affairs and Tactical Ideas. Like, they just make stuff up so they can bring all these far-right wackos into government and give them titles so they can sound important. Anyway, Israel's Women's Empowerment Minister, May Golan, told the BBC that a few victims of rape or sexual assault had survived the attacks, and that they were all currently receiving psychiatric treatment, and that everyone else was dead. So basically, the BBC said, can we talk to any of them? And they said, no, they're all in the mental ward. They're all like in a padded room locked up, and we can't let you talk to them because, you know, it's too sensitive. And look, there's a chance that that's true. I'm not saying it's not true. I think, though, that they would be able to have, by this point, have found someone to talk, and to say that everyone else is dead. It doesn't really, the problem with a lot of these stories is they don't match up with one another. Like,
Yeah, and I've heard contrary. So that's someone claiming, contrary to what I said, that a few victims had survived, but other people have said they're not sure if any
Yeah.
victims, alleged victims of rape, had survived. And the head of the commission said that it might be decades before anybody who survived a sexual assault even testifies. So we have to believe this allegation now, but we might have to wait decades until anyone who survived these alleged sexual crimes even testifies about it. It's just, and then you couple that with the lack of physical evidence, you couple that with all the other frauds that Israel's been caught concocting, the beheaded babies, the baby burned in an oven, the Hamas headquarters under Al-Shifa Hospital, the fact that some witnesses are only surfacing now, 2 months later. There's, at minimum, ample grounds to be skeptical.
so they tell us believe Israeli women. That's their mantra now. And I don't believe them, not because they're women, but because they're Israeli, and Israel just consistently lies and lies and lies so that Palestinians can die and die and die. That's just the way it's gone for my whole life. And I've just seen them lie so flagrantly over and over while our media just rolls over for them unskeptically. It's getting ridiculous. The BBC hosted as one of its key voices in its video and print report, May Golan, Israel's women's empowerment minister, who is I knew her, who she was from her previous act as a anti-Black, anti-migrant activist in South Tel Aviv who led riots and anti-migrant rallies of hooligans throughout Tel Aviv. And so I put together this video of her giving an interview to the BBC and her at one of these rallies, which was shot by my colleague and friend David Sheen. Just take a look at this. This is one of the key sources, and listen to what she's saying. I mean, just listen closely.
They were burned, they were without organs, they were butchered completely, they were slaughtered to the core. You had heads roaming around, you had breasts of women roaming around.
It's incorrectly transcribed. It's rolling around. So heads and breasts were just rolling around everywhere. I haven't seen any documentation of that, and I don't know where that's coming from.
And yeah.
And yeah.
We just wanted to focus a bit more on the practicalities of gathering.
So wait, before we go into this, the BBC's asking her about the practicalities of gathering evidence, and this is who they're asking.
אני רואה חרא מחוץ לבית שלי, יריקות, פסיכופטים, אנשים שרק מחפשים איך לרצוח
saying
אותי
outside our house I see
בעיניים שלהם, אבל אף אחד
psychopaths.
לא מאמין לנו.
Nobody
אנחנו
believes us. They call us
אנחנו
racist.
גזענים כדי
We're
לרצות
racist because we
לשמור
want
על
to
החיים
preserve our
שלנו
lives in
ועל
sanity.
הצביעות שלנו. אז אני גאה
So I am proud to be a
להיות
racist.
אני גאה
It's our right to be a
להיות
racist.
גזענית. אם אני גזענית,
If I'm racist to preserve my life, then I'm proud. It's our right to be a racist.
Just condemn it. Just make sure that you care about what women have gone through. Make sure you care about what women are now going through when they're abducted in Gaza.
So she's obviously been coached there. But Aaron, you're muted.
The BBC really is bad at doing their minimal due diligence and trying to be stenographers for Israel. If you're going to do that, if that's what you're going to turn your outlet into, you have to at least check that your sources aren't open racists. That's kind of like a minimum due diligence, but they don't even do that because they're so subservient to Israel. But, you know, when she says it's our right to be racist in that clip, I wonder if that's what they mean by Israel's right to exist.
Exactly. Exactly. And when has a country ever had where is the international law that says a country has a right to exist?
Yeah, no. It's a term invented to ensure that there can never be any peace, because you're basically demanding that Palestinians recognize not only your existence, but your right to exist on their stolen homes, and your right to be racist, your right to, as she talked about. So it's designed to make any kind of peaceful resolution impossible. But anyway, so this is the BBC's source here, is an open racist who was chanting for the deportation of Africans from Israel.
And they also cite, and one of the few photos they cite in that article is the one that I already debunked as being Kurdish fighters from prior to 2023.
Yeah.
their whole it's like the white helmets on an entirely different scale. In again weaponizing feminism to advance the mass killing of women in Gaza. And one of the, it's so funny to see a lot of these anti-woke commentators form the front line phalanx of Israel's keyboard warrior internet defense corps, because they can't seem to make up their mind. Like, they hate the Hamas quote unquote savages because they won't allow a LGBTQ pride parade, or because they are or because they're woke, because the Palestine solidarity movement is so woke and is connected to BLM and is filled with people who have blue hair and belong to Marxist organizations. Like, which is it? They can't seem to decide, and there's so many contradictions in their arguments as they support an army that is literally flying LGBTQ flags on some of its tanks in Gaza against a traditional religious family-based population that used to be mostly farmers defending their land before they were put in an open-air prison. And at the same time, they're weaponizing many of the causes that they despise in the United States to advance this genocide. One of those people is Batya Ungar-Sargon, who's a op-ed editor at Newsweek, who obviously presided over an opinion piece by the Israeli First Lady, Michal Herzog, who's married to Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, which is sort of a ceremonial position. Isaac Herzog had said there are no civilians in Gaza. There's no distinction between civilians and militants. And she published this piece in Newsweek under Batya's watch. Batya, who actually condemned the phrase "believe all women" or critiqued it harshly when it was part of the Me Too movement in the United States, but now wants us to believe all Israeli women because she herself is just a hardcore Likudnik neocon Zionist. And so I challenged her because this piece contained an obvious lie that was actually spread by Zaka, the Orthodox Rescue Organization I just exposed. A Hamas video from a kibbutz shows terrorists torturing a pregnant woman and removing her fetus. Okay, there is no Hamas video that shows that anywhere. In fact, what took place was Yossi Landau, the quote-unquote Southern commander from Zaka, made up this story. He said he saw this in, I believe, Kibbutz Be'eri, where no child under the age of 12 died, and that child was killed by an Israeli tank. Go ahead. Sorry?
I didn't say anything.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard you say something. Okay, no child died there. Only one baby was killed on October 7th, a 10-month-old named Mila Cohen, who was shot by accident. So this can't possibly be true. And the video that she's referring to was a video made by an Israeli social media user to try to legitimize the false claim by Yossi Landau, which actually depicted a Mexican cartel torturing a woman. So a fake video made its way to the desk of the Israeli First Lady and then into Newsweek through Zionist anti-woke commentator Batya Ungar-Sargon, and they went with it. And it's fake. And I challenged her. I said, Batya, you're entitled to your opinions, but not your own facts. As a Newsweek op-ed editor who obviously commissioned this piece of pro-war propaganda, can you point me to the video mentioned below by the Israeli First Lady? If not, why no retraction? And I wrote to her again, and she will not respond. She refuses to respond to me. Newsweek will not respond. This is journalism in 2023. This is mainstream journalism, is just publish any lie that seems plausible and indulges the prejudices of your some part of your readership base, and just stick to it. There's no ethics here anymore. And we can just go on and on. I mean, I could go on for like all day about the lies that we're seeing. Pretty much, if you just have like endless free time like we do, or it's like your job to pick through these lies, you'll find that every single claim either doesn't add up or is a complete fabrication or a half-baked distortion of some half-truth, which again is strange because atrocities were committed. People were deliberately, it appears pretty clear, Hamas militants shot
Yeah,
people deliberately on October 7th, but they're going beyond the established record of truth because they need to go beyond what is morally acceptable for most people in Gaza, because most people are not genocidal fanatics.
exactly. Yeah. And, since we're talking about people like Batya who, really market themselves as being anti-woke and calling out the snowflakes on campus, I mean, is there a bigger display of snowflakery than what we're seeing right now with this manufactured outrage about supposed anti-Semitism on campus, where pro-Israel students can't handle the fact that people are calling out the genocide that Israel is undertaking? And we just had this news conference where some
Yeah.
Penn student goes and appears with some Republican members of Congress, including House Speaker Mike Johnson. Let's just listen to this one very quick clip.
I do not feel safe. Let me be clear. I do not feel safe. I do not feel safe. Let me be clear. I do not feel safe.
And
Oh,
the
man.
like that was tweeted out by the account Propaganda and Co. And they said, just to be clear, Ivy League student standing behind the privileged Ivy League student standing behind two high-level politicians and aired by mainstream media does not feel safe. I mean, it's just such a farce what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I see videos of children writhing on the ground of blood-spattered, half-destroyed hospitals in the besieged, water and fuel-deprived Gaza Strip, their parents shrieking above them, praying that their child will live, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what can we do to make hyper-entitled, ultra-wealthy Jewish students from the suburbs feel safer on Ivy League campuses? Because that's really what we need to be focusing on right now. Because when they're triggered and they feel under attack, we need to pass new laws to protect them, because they are the weakest among us who have the ability to actually change our legal structure and mobilize members of Congress to deliver press conferences with them. It all makes sense. It all makes perfect sense. And we need to watch more Jake Tapper and Dana Bash to learn more about the real vulnerable groups among us. Because that's what journalism's about. It's about afflicting, it's about comforting the comfortable and afflicting the powerless. That's really what it's about.
Yes, exactly.
Where do we go from here? I mean, that's the other, I mean, that's the other sort of propaganda ploy is, if you don't like our genocide, you're a racist. And it's the people who critiqued BLM the most harshly who are pushing that line. Barry Weiss. I mean, Barry Weiss has lied so many times in the past few weeks and pushed so many lies just to advance her ethno-supremacist imperatives that I'm starting to question whether the graffiti that appeared outside the offices of her relatively newfangled publication Free Press, I guess ironically named publication Free Press since she's such an opponent of the First Amendment, the graffiti that anti-Semitic graffiti that appeared on like October 13th, I'm starting to wonder if that was a false flag and that maybe she wrote it herself because she's just such a deceitful liar. Who would have even been able to get into like a building with the security code and write that? And who would even know that their offices were there or even care? I mean, it's still,
Yeah, exactly. Who would care? That's my question. Who would care about this obvious fraud of a person to go? I mean, who exposes herself intellectually constantly with being caught lying and saying and pretending to be a victim while posing as being sort of this, like, again, this critic of snowflake culture. These people are just, they're beyond contempt.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to go back to that, since we're talking about that, I want to go back to that student, because like I've been given many talks for divestment hearings at campuses in the past. And every time I would show up, like at the University of Michigan in 2015, every time I showed up, or maybe it was 2014. No, it was 2015. It was a huge event. The Jewish pro-Israel students, who did not represent all the Jewish students, would come up with the wildest stories. It was sort of like the campus analog to the stories we're hearing about October 7th. And it was clear that someone was encouraging them to come up with like, anything they could to advance their cause and just shut down this divestment hearing. And that, if divestment took place and the University of Michigan divested from corporations that had business in the occupied territories, which is purely symbolic, that the second Holocaust would take place. So it's urgent to just make up anything you can. So when I got there, this South Asian student was accused of calling a Jewish student the K word. And this constantly came up. I can't say that word here, but it's the same name as a Los Angeles Dodgers left fielder whose last name is Hernandez, and they call him Kike. But where would a South Asian immigrant student even know that term from? It was just so fake. And so the UPenn student is coming up with all of these obvious lies, like his professor is calling for like the genocide of Jews, but he doesn't even name.
Well, I'm both honored and thankful while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property in my senior year of college. So while I should not be here today, I am. Because 36 hours ago, I, along with most of campus, sought refuge in our rooms as classmates and professors chanted proudly for the genocide of Jews while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property.
So which professor did that?
The neighboring.
What does he mean by chanting? What does he mean by chanting for genocide? He probably means
that's code for chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Yeah, exactly.
And when they say Jews, they mean like Israel or Zionism. They completely conflate it like the anti-Semites they claim to condemn.
Yeah, and there have been some people like Mayim Bialik of Blossom fame who, on a video where people are chanting Biden, Biden, you can't hide, or Netanyahu, Netanyahu, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide, where she's heard that same clip and said, look at these students chanting for Jewish genocide. That's happened before. So
yeah. The Canadian, what is it? CIJA, Canadian Institute for Jewish Affairs, which is the main pro-Israel lobby group there, tweeted video of people chanting Trudeau, Trudeau, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide. Protesters, and they said they transcribed it as Judah, Judah, you can't hide. Like that's very creative, but who would even think of that? Okay, let's just, this is what's going on at the highest levels.
Released a statement describing this as a brazen display of anti-Semitism. He went on saying, silence in the face of last night's demonstration of anti-Semitism and hate near our doorstep is not an option for me. Well, the doorstep of the neighboring university is in fact Penn. And in fact, Penn's president did choose silence. The neighboring university's president swiftly denounced the incident, and yet our president cannot. Because the glorious October 7th, and you're a dirty little Jew, you deserve to die, are words said not by Hamas, but by my classmates and professors.
Their professors said to him, you're a dirty little Jew and deserve to die. Like,
yeah. So logic, if that happened, logic complaint. I mean, I'm sure he's inventing it, but what you do is you logic complaint at your school.
Yeah. And at the student, you lodge a complaint against the student, and they're done.
Yeah. But like, it's just this display, as meanwhile, you have 3 Palestinian young men shot in Vermont while they're wearing keffiyehs and speaking Arabic. One of them is paralyzed from the chest down. That's the real hatred that is being expressed right now with violence. And you don't see these young men getting a national press conference with the Speaker of the House on Capitol Hill. You have these characters instead. It's instead.
did they ever ask, why is this suddenly happening? Like, let's just say there's anti-Semitism. Like, let's just say it's all true. Why is it happening?
Yeah.
I was actually in 2014. I was in 2014, before I was in Gaza for the first time. I was in Istanbul, and I got introduced to some Turkish Jews there. And Turkish Jews exist in a much more unstable environment than Jewish Americans. There are not that many of them, and protests there can turn anti-Semitic in some ways. The Islamist protests there get pretty intense, and they told me that they have to stay at home when Israel does something terrible to Palestinians. I interviewed 3 Turkish Jews, and they all told me this. And none of them express any support for Zionism, but they're not anti-Zionist either. They basically just want to be Turkish. They want to be normal in Turkey, and they feel like Israel is not allowing them to be normal because it inflames the anger of Muslims, and they live in a predominantly Muslim society. And this is the story of Zionism across the Middle East and across the world, but particularly in the Middle East. Inflaming Muslims, making Jews into objects of suspicion as it carries out crimes in their name as the so-called Jewish state. And now you have these Zionist activists on campus who've taken up Israel as a central pillar of their identity, claiming that they are oppressed, that they are victims, because people are outraged at what Israel's doing. So if Israel was a normal country and it had equal rights for everyone, at least equal rights under the law, this wouldn't be happening. There wouldn't be they wouldn't, first of all, they wouldn't be needing to commit ethnic cleansing and genocide with a population that it warehouses to preserve its ethno-supremacist identity. And then Jewish Americans wouldn't be connected to any of that. They would be like Episcopalians who are funnier and more interesting, maybe. That's we would just be like Episcopalians.
Yeah.
And they've adopted Zionism as this central pillar of their identity. And Zionism will not allow Jews to be normal. It can't let us be normal, because if it does, then it loses its support base. And if we exist in a normal, stable, comfortable situation, we'll no longer consider making quote unquote aliyah and moving there and having more Jewish babies to support their demographic trench war against the Palestinians.
Yeah.
So Israel's fueled by anti-Semitism. It wants anti-Semitism. It doesn't want us to be here. It wants us to be there in the least safe place for Jews in the entire world. And for Zionists who stay here, they are psychologically accepting permanent instability, because the gulf between the reality all around them and what they personally experience just grows deeper and deeper each day. They have to dismiss all critique from their peers as a personal attack, as racism. And the only thing that stands between them and a Dorian Gray-like moment of crushing self-reflection, where they see that everything they believe is a genocidal lie factory, is this persecution complex, where they're able to just dismiss all critique and everyone trying to reach them and tell them what's wrong as anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism, desire for another Holocaust. And so you have like these, it's driven people mad on campus. And that's what you see there with that student and he's going to be rewarded for that with like some big political career. So it's terrible. I would see this as a terrible development for American Jews.
It's just also just so embarrassing. I mean, I every time I see this, I just feel embarrassed. I mean, I feel embarrassed for a million reasons. Foremost, the genocide committed in my name, but this stuff too, this self-victimization. Here's another example from this Republican farce. Harvard student on what it is like to be a Jewish student at Harvard. Everybody, take a moment to think of the poor Jewish students at Harvard, among the most marginalized, disenfranchised people on earth. I mean, it's just such a joke. Like you're talking about actually one of the most privileged segments of the population.
Yeah.
and they're the ones at the forefront claiming to be victims. And what does all this do? It serves to distract from what's actually going on before our eyes, which is a live genocide, an extermination of a people in Gaza with our weapons, with our support. There was recently an Israeli retired military official who said that we could not do this. Here, I'll show the quote. He said basically that none of this could happen without the support of the United States. All of our missiles, the ammunition, the precision guided bombs, all the airplanes and bombs, it's all from the US. The minute they turn off the tap, you can't keep fighting. You have no capability. Everyone understands that we can't fight this war without the US, period. And the person saying that is retired IDF Major General Yitzhak Brick, who is also a current advisor to Netanyahu and involved in formulating strategy. He's making plain that Israel could not conduct, it's not a war at all. It's a extermination campaign. It's a genocide campaign. Israel could not do it without the US.
Yeah, I mean, this is just today. Israel's Ministry of Defense says the 200th aircraft has arrived with American equipment in Israel. Over 10,000 tons of military equipment were brought to Israel through sea and flight operations, including armored vehicles, armaments, personal protective equipment, medical equipment, and ammo. They're totally dependent. This so-called Jewish state is totally dependent on its direct line to the Gentile authority at the Pentagon. And all the defense contractors that are seeing surging stocks thanks to this genocidal war. And those bombs are going to drop directly on family homes and destroy countless lives before this live stream is even over.
And we've forgotten. So 1 month ago, this is a headline from the New York Times that, after, weeks of Israeli mass murder in Gaza, there was those massive bombs dropped on refugee camps, flattening entire neighborhoods. You started hearing the Biden administration trying to claim that they were getting Israel to moderate its behavior. And does anyone remember this when they were saying we're going to give Israel smaller bombs? That was like the heart of the U.S. plan to get Israel to kill less people. That was a month ago in the New York Times. Fast forward to today, that's long been forgotten. They're not even bothering to claim that anymore. Now, here's a headline from the Wall Street Journal. U.S. sends Israel 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs for Gaza war. And the subheadline is, after sending massive bombs, artillery shells, U.S. also urges Israel to limit civilian casualties. So even those face-saving steps that the U.S. was trying to claim they were undertaking a month ago about giving Israel smaller bombs, they're not even bothering with that anymore. Now we're giving them the exact same bombs that have been used from the start. We're rearming Israel to drop bombs on entire neighborhoods while also urging them to limit civilian casualties.
Well, yeah, we don't have the Israeli Hunger Games map with us right now, unless you can pull that up. But that seems to be one outcome of consultations with the Biden administration, Blinken and company, is they created this Squid Games, Hunger Games style map of the Gaza Strip that creates death zones. And they basically supposedly tell civilians which death zone is going to be exterminated and tell them to move. And if you zoom in on it, I think it could be helpful. You can see that each death zone is numbered.
I can't zoom, unfortunately.
With
this.
Okay, well, all of those squares, those little squares you see, are numbered by the Israeli military. Each one is a kill zone. And they'll say, leave kill zone number 34 for number 37. And it's like a sick, genocidal, tyrannical board game being played by the Israeli ghetto masters. And that the Biden administration seems to have signed off on, because it immediately emerged after these consultations where Blinken said, we urge them to be more clinical in what they're doing. And beyond that, I mean, come on. The Israelis say exactly what they're going to do. This is one of the few points in which they're honest. They tell you their military doctrine is about killing civilians, attacking civilians. It's called the Dahia Doctrine, named after a area of Beirut that was wiped off the map during the 2006 war. And it was rebuilt, but it was flattened. And the whole point is to demoralize the civilian population to the point where they turn on their political leadership, and that the political leadership must think twice before it attacks Israel or retaliates for fear of losing so many civilian casualties, because Israel is unable to militarily defeat Hezbollah or even the likes of Hamas, which is much militarily weaker, operating under siege. You can see that right now. Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassam Brigade, is able to carry out operations day after day, killing Israeli soldiers and taking out tanks, while Israel kills massive amounts of Palestinian civilians at a rate of something like, I mean, I've seen it at 3,000 to 1, based on the Israeli calculations of saying they've killed 1,000 to 2,000 Hamas militants, mid-level commanders, and they've killed 15,000 civilians. So at that rate, what do they have to kill? Like 300,000 to 600,000 people in the Gaza Strip before they fulfill their goal of quote unquote wiping out Hamas. That would be 1 out of every 3 people has to be exterminated before they can declare victory.
Yeah, Israel claims the ratio. Israel claims the ratio is 2 to 1, but that's a lie. But even if it were true, it still would be obscene, because who are we talking about when you're talking about killing members of Hamas? You're talking about low-level fighters who are fighting an occupation. It's not as if we're talking about like fighting a conventional army. This is not an army. It's not a war. It's just an extermination campaign. And here's genocide John Kirby of the White House bragging about the U.S. role in that genocide map.
We've seen those warnings from Vice President Harris and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin about civilian casualties. Any sense that Israel is heeding those warnings?
Yes, sir. We believe that they have been receptive to our messages here in terms of trying to minimize civilian casualties. And I would tell you, we saw that as they went into North Gaza. They did it in a more precise way, a smaller way. And just in the last 24, 48 hours, George, they published online a map of places where people could go to avoid combat. They could go where they could find safety from combat. There's not a whole lot of modern militaries that would do that. I mean, so to telegraph their punches in that way. So they are making an effort.
We've seen those.
Wow.
First of all, I mean, just putting aside the support for genocide there, like, how are people of Gaza supposed to even see the supposed map?
Yeah.
How? Like, there's no internet. Phone service doesn't work or barely works. Israel's dropping leaflets sometimes. So yeah, maybe you're lucky enough to get a leaflet with a map of where you can run to with a number code. But of course, when you do that, you get bombed anyway, because Israel's bombed people fleeing countless times. There's nowhere, as a top UN official said, there's nowhere safe in Gaza. Nowhere safe in Gaza. No matter how many numbers you put on your genocide map, there's nowhere safe in Gaza as you subjected to this bombing campaign with 2,000-pound American-made bombs.
Yeah. I've been saying since the beginning that what Israel's doing is it takes the entire population register of Gaza, looks for any home or area that it can remotely connect to Hamas or any militant faction. And you have the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade operating as well. That's the armed wing of Fatah, which controls the West Bank. I mean, it's across society, there's armed resistance, and they just bomb any house. And now we know through this, there's a report in the liberal left Israeli, kind of critical liberal left Israeli publication 972 about the mass assassination factory, which relies on testimony and quotes by, I think, 6 anonymous intelligence officials. These are basically, I think they're younger people who are involved in military intelligence and targeting. I've quoted some of them before in the past who are like former military intelligence, who told me that during, for example, the Second Lebanon War, they were involved in targeting. They were told to just make up targets because they had run out of military targets. And then they went crazy. One particular person told me he went so crazy and felt so disgusted with himself that he asked a friend to smash his leg with a 2x4 so he could get out of military service, but his leg refused to break. He eventually got out, left Israel permanently. But I think these intelligence officers are having moral qualms and they've gone to one of the more critical publications operating in the Hebrew language media space, 972, to describe a mass assassination factory that relies on an AI system called the Gospel to attack power targets like public buildings, infrastructure, and high-rise blocks. Let me find the passage about the AI system. Well, first of all, they say nothing happens by accident. This is one source. When a 3-year-old girl is killed in a home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed, that it was a price worth paying in order to hit another target. We are not Hamas. These are not random rockets. Everything is intentional. We know exactly how much collateral damage there is in every home. There's a reason for the larger number of targets and the extensive harm to civilian life in Gaza. It's the widespread use of a system called Habsorah, or the Gospel, which is largely built on artificial intelligence and can generate targets almost automatically at a rate that far exceeds what was previously possible. This AI system, as described by a former intelligence officer, essentially facilitates a, quote, mass assassination factory. And they carry out, as I've been saying, they carry out strikes on residential homes where a single Hamas member lives. They carry out strikes on a massive scale, even those who are junior Hamas operatives. And this is what explains, for example, the massive strike in, I believe, early November on the Jabalia refugee camp that killed 300 people in order to kill one mid-level Hamas commander. They used several 2,000-pound bombs, GBU bombs, to do that. So this is just clear evidence of deliberate genocide, deliberate slaughter of a civilian population. And John, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, John Kirby's, all he's doing is providing window dressing for the ongoing campaign of a mass assassination. That's all he's doing. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, and the Biden administration is doing this even though they know that this has nothing to do with self-defense. From Israel's founding, Israeli leaders have always talked about what's called their deterrence capability. And Ariel Sharon, who went on to become defense minister and later prime minister, back in 1956, he defined Israel's deterrence capability as what he called, quote, their fear of us. And that's what it's all about. It's not about self-defense. It's about making Palestinians and surrounding Arab states fear Israel, because Israel is the hegemon in the region. There's the right to steal as much land as possible and dispossess whoever it wants. And this was recently admitted to be a driving aim in this war too by the Biden administration. So this is from the New York Times recently. And they say this: the Americans say Israel's forceful response to the attack by Hamas on October 7th reflects the importance that it places on reestablishing deterrence against attacks from adversaries in the region. The Israeli military's aura of power was shaken by the October 7th attack, the officials say. And that's what's at the heart of this. It's not about defending yourself from anything. It's the fact that your supremacy, your hegemony, defined here as aura of power, was shaken. And when hegemons have their aura of power shaken, they have to respond, in this case, with a genocide. That's what's going on here. That's what the Biden administration is arming. They know that's what they're doing. And they're doing it because they share the hegemonic outlook of Israel. They want to dominate the region. They want people to be afraid of them. They see
this is
the
what
Arabs
remains.
and this is what they're doing to Gaza as a result.
Yeah, this is drone footage that was provided to us by a journalist in Gaza, Mohammed El Saif. And it shows the Al Zara neighborhood southeast of Gaza City, just north of the supposed evacuation zone that Israel ordered residents of Gaza to flee to. It just shows you the level of destruction of a completely civilian neighborhood of high-rise blocks, quote unquote, power targets. And this is Israel restoring its aura of power. And the aura of power is the psychological aura that Jewish Israelis need to exist in precisely because they are settler colonists.
Yeah.
They need to feel that they can enjoy a European standard of living in a region where the entire population or much of it, much of the population is hostile to them because they've taken their land and forced them into ghettos and do not include them in their society. The Palestinian population, which has nowhere to go, does not require that, which gives them a psychological advantage over Israelis. And so Israel needs to restore the balance in order to maintain its quote unquote villa in the jungle. And this is what it's doing. It's basically trying to set Gaza back 20 to 50 years in order to tell whatever population is left never to resist again and to accept permanent occupation over continual genocide.
And every pixel in this image, right, represents a life. There are people packed into these buildings. And of course, because so many homes in Gaza have already been destroyed in previous Israeli massacres, you have multiple generations of families living in these small dwellings, all of this being wiped out with U.S. support. It really is, as my dad said when he came on here once, Gabor Mate, he said, it's the worst thing he's ever seen in his life. And it's true. There's nothing worse than this, because this is all unfolding before our eyes. We're the ones abetting it. It could not happen, as Israeli officials admit, without U.S. support. And still, 2 months in, you have the entire foreign policy establishment in Washington behind this. Anybody who dissents is, it's very, very marginal. Bernie Sanders can't even bring himself to call for a permanent ceasefire now. He's talking now about conditioning U.S. military aid, but of course it's way too late. Like the damage is being done before our eyes. And if you won't call for a permanent ceasefire, then you're basically endorsing what Israel's doing, no matter what conditions you try to put on it.
These are bedrooms. The way many of these Palestinian homes function is that they build from the ground up, starting with the family. A mother and father will have a work for 10, 20 years and save up, have kids. And then when their kids are grown up, they'll get married and they'll live on the second floor. And then their kids will live on the third floor. And so what you're seeing is the destruction of a family's life savings, all their life plans, and in many cases, the entire family is killed. Dozens, scores and scores of families, entire families have been erased from the civil register in the Gaza Strip. And while I can't show bodies and carnage because of YouTube's rules, I think that's a pretty proper illustration.
And the footage we've seen, they blew up the courthouse. They've blown up every single university in Gaza. I mean, it's such a deliberate attempt to not only kill people, but wipe out their society so that it can't rebuild.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, if it's not genocide, what is genocide? I mean, what does a genocide look like? I just always avoid that term because it's so relentlessly exploited by people like Samantha Power, who's directly implicated in this crime now. Yeah, I just don't know what else to call it.
No, of course. And what you'll get from people when you use the term genocide is they'll say, well, if they really wanted to commit genocide, they could wipe out everybody in Gaza, but they don't. So basically, these people define genocide as every single person in Gaza being killed. But that's not what genocide is. Genocide is the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. That's what Israel openly says, is they want to wipe out Gaza. That's what Israelis have said since Israel was founded, since before Israel was founded, is they wanted to wipe out the Palestinian people. So this is textbook genocide.
And we have the intent to commit genocide clearly expressed from Benjamin Netanyahu to everyone on down. Just countless descriptions of Palestinians as animals, human animals who need to be destroyed, calls for reducing Gaza to a parking lot by current and former Israeli lawmakers, officials. As I said, the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, declaring there's no distinction between civilians and militants. All the civilians are culpable. It's all there. There's a pretty easy case you can make. And where is the head of the ICC, Karim Khan? the guy who issued a warrant for Vladimir Putin because he evacuated ethnically Russian children from the eastern Donbass region to Russian territory from a war zone to safety, who issued a criminal arrest warrant for Putin, perfectly timed for international sports competition, or sorry, perfectly timed for the BRICS conference in South Africa where Putin was due to appear. Where's Kareem Khan? He's in Israel meeting with Israelis to investigate crimes by Palestinians against them.
It's such a joke.
I mean, and Palestinian rights groups have refused to meet with Kareem Khan because they see that if they do so, they're just going to be providing, a decoration for his ultimate goal, which is to attack Palestinians on behalf of his true masters, the United States and NATO. I mean, the ICC has never been more co-opted, never been more controlled. It's what you illustrated, Aaron, with the whole campaign against the OPCW around Syria on a global scale. The ICC is hollowed out. All the institutions have been exposed by Gaza. The Auschwitz Memorial Museum has issued a statement supporting Israel's assault on Gaza. So never again, only for us. All the institutions, the whole genocide prevention industry is silent or supporting Israel.
So they're a genocide promotion industry. That's what they really are.
Well, we just see that the whole concept of genocide has been weaponized by Western states and the kind of transatlantic power elite in order to advance their regime change objectives. And that's what we've been combating at the Grayzone for so long. And now we see genocide being committed before our eyes in the service of regime change. And they're all either silent or they're participants like Samantha Power, who's sort of the guru of the genocide prevention industry. It's the biggest mask off moment of my life. I would guess second would be, Trump being elected. I don't know what your second would be, but the masks are off. And I don't know if you want to transition now to Ukraine, but this is another mask off moment.
Well, yeah. So look, it's honestly hard for me to spend time on Ukraine these days, even though this has been a major focus of ours for the last, 2 years, because this is a catastrophic proxy war. But, with this genocide going on, it's hard to focus on anything but Gaza. But there is a proxy war still going on. And we've been pointing out from the start that not only was it, immoral to use Ukraine to bleed Russia when there were peaceful alternatives. There was the Minsk Accords, which were on the table for 8 years, and the U.S. backed Ukraine's far right in refusing to implement them. And then there was Russia's peace proposals in December 2021, which could have at least been discussed, but the U.S. and NATO pretty much rejected them. And then you had a peace deal reached in early 2022, just weeks into the war between Ukraine and Russia. And we recently had the top Ukrainian negotiator at those talks come out and confirm that, Boris Johnson came to Kyiv and said, we're not going to back you up if you sign a peace deal, and we have to keep fighting Russia. So that's more confirmation that the West sabotaged a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia that could have ended this war and saved hundreds of thousands of lives, which brings us to today. And let's just check in from some reliable U.S. media outlets on how the proxy war is going for Ukraine and its NATO sponsors. This is the Wall Street Journal from the other day. As Russia's war against Ukraine approaches its third year, Moscow holds the advantage on the military, political, and economic front. Okay, so that's how things are going in Ukraine. Of course, the propaganda picture we've gotten for the last 2 years is anything but that. We keep hearing about how Russia is losing. Remember when what's her name, Ursula von der Leyen, was talking about how Russia has to use chips from dishwashers to for its weapons, was bragging about that, how the Russian economy was tanking. All that's been forgotten. Here's the Washington Post. Looking at the factors after Ukraine launched this counteroffensive, which was a complete disaster. They had to launch it under U.S. orders, even though they were not prepared, even though they didn't have air power, which you need to do in these kind of situations. Now the Washington Post admits that with everything going on, victory for Ukraine is far less likely than years of war and destruction. And if you were to point this out in the last 2 years of war of destruction, you'd be dismissed as a Kremlin propagandist, as we were. But now it's being impossible to ignore. So what's happening? Well, Ukraine's being thrown under the bus because they're running out of Ukrainians to sacrifice. And so even someone like Lindsey Graham, who is one of the most fanatic proxy warriors there is, even now he's starting to walk away from Ukraine. And listen to what he said just the other day, speaking to Dana Bash of CNN. And remember, Lindsey Graham is the one who said, as long as we keep arming them, they will fight to the last person. That's a wonderful thing. And here he is now.
But all Republicans wanted. So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves. And this is the guy who went to Ukraine in late 2016 with John McCain and said that this will be the year of offense. We're behind you. One of the most fanatical supporters of this proxy war. Even now he's walking away. And now he claims he cares about funding the border. And sure, he does. Yes. But the only reason he's trying to link that now, Ukraine to border security is because he knows that this is a lost cause, that they're running out of Ukrainians to sacrifice.
Well, he wanted to fight to the last Ukrainian last year.
Yeah.
He said so
Yeah.
in a press conference with Richard Blumenthal. No relation to Denang Dick, but he seems to have changed his tune, along with one of the other major cheerleaders for the Ukraine proxy war, The Economist. Is Putin winning? I wonder, inside Russia's war machine. So they basically admit defeat. I mean, if you had read The Economist over the last 2 years, it was like nonstop cheerleading and projections of victory, portrayals of Russia as the weakest army, as Tony Blinken said, the second strongest army in Ukraine.
Oh, God.
He said that earlier this year.
Yeah, that was in June, I believe. So right as the counteroffensive was kicking off. So as he's bragging about how Russia is supposedly weaker than Ukraine, he's openly sending off tens of thousands of more young Ukrainians to get slaughtered. And now they're trying to walk away silently. So now, as we're recording this, there's this impasse on Capitol Hill where Biden is begging for more money. He wants $60 billion for this proxy war. But Republicans are saying, no, we want border security first. And Democrats are saying we won't do that. And if Democrats really cared about Ukraine as much as they claim to, why wouldn't they give Republicans their border security money? I think it looks to me like both parties are just trying to come up or use each other to walk away here. And just yesterday, there was supposed to be a briefing with Zelensky, but the last second, Chuck Schumer announced that Zelensky would not be showing up.
Zelensky, by the way, could not make it to our. Something happened at the last minute to
Well,
our.
can they have him talk about anti-Semitism or something?
You'll hear, particularly from Mark Warner, who knows this so well, how desperate Ukraine is for the aid that the president has proposed. Zelensky.
I mean, it's just been such a disaster. These people have no interest in Ukraine from the start. They just wanted to use it to bleed Russia. They've outlived their purpose because there's no more lives, or there's very few lives left to sacrifice. And whether or not they end up passing the $60 billion or not, I mean, maybe they'll pull through. I don't know. But this war, I think, is on its last legs.
So we'll witness a war of the mandarins inside Ukraine. We've already seen Zaluzhny, the army chief of staff, have an aide who was killed by a package bomb, or they said it was an accident. This could have been something that Andrei Yermak, who's really in charge of Zelensky, arranged. It is Zaluzhny came under attack for calling the war, as it was, a stalemate. Who's going to wind this one down, and how will the U.S. pull a Manuel Noriega on Zelensky? The drama is still building behind the carnage in Gaza, and as fewer people pay attention, it's a massive tragedy for Ukraine, because we've also crossed the 10-year anniversary of the Maidan coup. That's where the United States convinced a plurality, not a majority, but a plurality of Ukrainians, and the EU convinced them that if they rejected a deal, like a gas and grain deal with Russia, and opted for EU economic austerity package. They would eventually get EU membership, and maybe they'd get NATO membership, and they would be stronger and more prosperous. And so they went out into Maidan Square along with a bunch of neo-Nazi thugs who were the real muscle. But, hopeful young people went out and cheered for the removal of a democratically elected but corrupt president who wanted Ukraine to stay neutral. 10 years later, Ukraine is the poorest country in Europe. It has an unprecedented migration crisis. It has lost 200,000 to 500,000 mostly young men in combat. Many are maimed, many more are maimed. And it's lost 1/3 of its territory, including very productive territory for farming. And it is destined to be raided by the vulture capitalists at BlackRock and the companies they control. That's the price of abandoning neutrality. Ukraine means borderlands, and a country like that is naturally neutral. But the United States forced it into, it was attempting to force it into a position where it was an anti-Russian, unsinkable aircraft carrier, kind of Israel in Eastern Europe, big Israel, as Zelensky called it. And now it is another victim, a tragic victim of US imperialism. RIP post-Maidan Ukraine.
Remember when it was so difficult to say a critical word of Zelensky because he was tapped as the face of the U.S. proxy war? Well, now it's out in the open. Now it's fine because he's outliving its use. So here's the New York Post, which says Zelensky is turning Ukraine into authoritarian state, just like Russia, says Kyiv mayor in shocking interview.
Shocking.
This mayor is Klitschko.
Yeah.
And for those who remember the infamous tape of Victoria Nuland speaking with the then U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piet, about who should run Ukraine after the coup succeeds. This is shortly before the February 2014 Maidan coup. They talk about Klitschko as a possible candidate for who they want to install. But then Nuland says, no, Klitsch is better on the outside. He's too close to the Europeans. So anyway, but now Klitsch is the mayor of Ukraine, and he's speaking out against Zelensky, calling him an authoritarian. So that's how it's going. And that's, by the way, the democracy we're supposedly defending inside of Ukraine. And by the way, that talking point about, we're defending democracy versus autocracy, the Biden administration's dropped that one. That's that PR tactic isn't working anymore. So now they're distributing a map to members of the Senate, especially from Republicans, to convince them to vote for more Ukraine by saying, look at all the money we're spending on the military-industrial complex and how it's benefiting your state. There was a headline in Politico. It was called Bombonomics. And that's what they're calling this. I can show it here. It's just the mask is fully off. The mask is fully off this proxy war, as it was always going to be. And those of us who called this from the start, we knew this would happen. There it is. Bombonomics. Biden administration.
My God.
Map showing states that benefit from Ukraine aid. And that's where we're at.
That's in Biden's speech appealing for aid and likening the fight against Putin to the fight against Hamas. He referred to the U.S. as the arsenal of democracy, and specifically referred to arms factories in Pennsylvania, a key swing state. Basically said, these wars are creating jobs. We need to kill people for jobs in Pennsylvania. Those are good union jobs. So
we can't spend money to give people jobs to build things to help society in this country, but we can give people jobs to build bombs that kill innocent people in Gaza. That's the message from the Biden White House. They love socialism when it's for warmongering, not to actually benefit the people of this country.
Well, and they put the American worker and unions in a position where they have to defend those wars in order to hold on to one of the last productive industries in the country, because they sent the rest overseas.
Yes.
And then there's the I got to jump off in 1 minute, but we have a political timetable being imposed on the war in Gaza. The Biden administration has leaked that it wants the war to wrap up by January. That will be too soon for Israel, which wants the war to continue throughout 2024 because they need regime change, and they're not achieving it. Hamas is fully intact and its armed wing is out in the field. And So we're going to see the contradictions and clash between Washington's interests and those of the Jewish state in Israel and the Levant continue to widen, and we'll keep covering it.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Please like this stream if you haven't already. Go to thegrayzone.com. Check out Max's new story about this scam group Zaka, which has been so critical to Israeli claims about October 7th. Max exposes them as the frauds that they are. And yeah, we'll be back on here soon.
Thank you, Aaron. And thanks everyone for watching. If you can't get enough of me, in like 3 minutes, I'm going to be on the Mother of All talk shows with a special guest host, which is why I have to get off here. I thought I'd be on at 4:40, but they want me on at 4:20. And that's the only 4:20 that I observe is Mother of All talk shows. And then after that, I'll be on Judge Napolitano. So check me out there. And then I'm going to have a date with a defibrillator because I'm totally exhausted. Anyway, enjoy yourselves. Peace. We'll be back soon.